This is the Storypunks podcast, the show where we talk about all the punks, so steampunk, dieselpunk, cyberpunk, and all the other punks. Today we're talking about cyberpunk. I'm so thrilled to have a cybersecurity expert on the show with me, Matthew Mather. His books have done so well, and I am so excited to hear about his film options for many of his stories and to share all this with you. He talks with us about his process, including how he researches, and it's really cool how he combines that with his expertise, as already mentioned. So I'm also really thrilled to even be here for episode 49. There were times when I thought that would never happen. With this podcast, it's been so tricky to figure everything out, but you know what? I've been doing it. And a big part of that is all about you and your responses when I do opportunities for feedback, including the current survey I'm running. So I'm going to focus on this week instead of a personal update. If you could please leave your feedback about the show, that is so helpful. And it really guides what I will include or omit in future episodes and helps me know what people are valuing or not valuing. The other thing to think about with the survey is if you haven't been able to give back in some of the other ways that I've mentioned, like leaving a review, that's just not everybody's thing. But this is a really cool way that you can just go to this link on my site, storypunks.world/survey. And if you have 4 minutes, they told me that's how long this should take, because SurveyMonkey estimates it for you. But I think there's 10 questions, and yeah, it should only take 4 minutes, and your insight is really, really valuable. So if you can just give a few minutes that way, that is all good. And I really appreciate everyone participating in this show, however it makes sense for them. So thank you for considering just pausing here and doing that little bit to make sure that I'm not just talking at you, but I'm talking with you and helping in any way that actually makes sense with this show. Storypunks.world/survey. And I am just so excited to get to this interview. I have one last thing to mention before we jump in and honestly glean all the insight that Matthew's going to share with us. And that is to point you to his books on Audible. So as you probably already know, I love audiobooks. They're how I get a lot done, even while I'm getting lost in a book. And that's especially true when I'm listening to a thriller. That is my escapist genre of choice, and I especially love when I find punk-related thrillers. So these technothrillers are definitely fitting that bill, and I've added them to my running list of punk-themed audiobooks, which I keep over at storypunks.world/audible, and you'll find Matthew Mather's titles like The Atopia Chronicles, Cyberstorm, and the other titles that we're going to talk about today. Many of them, if not most of them, are on audio. And that's so fun. So be sure to check that out. Again, go to storypunks.world/audible. And with that, I think we are truly ready to jump right in and learn more about cyberpunk, technothrillers, and everything else that goes into Matthew Mather's process. He has a lot of insight about the genre as a whole, and I am just truly thrilled to have him on the Storypunks podcast today. Here we go. Matthew Mather is the best-selling author of Cyberstorm, recently acquired for film by 20th Century Fox, and the 6-part hit series Atopia Chronicles. He is also a leading member of the world's cybersecurity community who started out his career working at the McGill Center for Intelligent Machines. He went on to found one of the first tactile interface companies, which became the world leader in its field, as well as creating a major award-winning brain training video game. So cool. In between, he's worked in a variety of startups, everything from computational nanotechnology, there you go, to electronic health records, weather prediction systems to genomics, and even social intelligence research. He now works as a full-time author of speculative fiction. He spends his time between Charlotte, North Carolina, and Montreal, Quebec, hanging out with his bright and beautiful wife, Julie, and their 3 dogs and a cat. Welcome onto the show.
Thank you. That bio is pretty wordy. Yeah, that's not. I've actually got a shorter one I use now for things, but that encapsulates a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think it can be good for a show like this. So it really gives people a feel for who is coming on and speaking with me today, and it's really cool to hear about your background in some of these fields that have informed your fiction. So
I actually did work in all of those things, and I could explain all of them if somebody wanted to the extent that they'd want me to explain some of those things.
Yeah, and then to see how it comes into your work, I'm so excited to talk about that. So on this show, as you know, we talk about the punks, and you've referred to many, if not all of your stories, we'll talk about this, but you've referred to them as technothrillers, which many would consider adjacent to cyberpunk at least. So I want to start by just getting a working definition from you for the term cyberpunk. It's really helpful for us in this community, people listening in the audience, to keep hearing people's definitions.
I guess it's the character point of view that defines sort of the punk side of it. Like as if you were a punk and then living in that future world versus some of the other storylines where you could be, like a middle-aged, father working, living in middle America kind of thing would give you a different perspective on that world. So I think it's the character's point of view that gives you that definition of punk. I think like sort of the young person, young person's perspective on whatever future world that they're put into. Yeah.
Well, I think that's an amazing contribution to this ongoing discussion we're having on the show because, I did have one person, Bruce Bethke, he mentioned how young people specifically were really his genesis of cyberpunk and everything. Right. And so I think that's really interesting to think about it from the character's perspective. Like you said, that's very cool.
Yeah, because some of the worlds that they write about, I could write about that same world as well. But it all depends on the point of view that you're looking at it from. Are you looking at it from the president of the United States or some government functionary versus like a very low down person that's delivering pizzas, like at the beginning of there's different ways that you view the world depending on who that character is. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, well said. Okay, well, congratulations on your 20th Century Fox film adaptation of Cyberstorm. Definitely. Your Goodreads description of this book mentions its appeal to fans of Tom Clancy and Michael Crichton, as well as William Gibson and Neil Stephenson. So It made me wonder, in what ways, if any, do you see Gibson and Stephenson as distinct from Clancy and Crichton, or do they not split along those lines for you, and why?
Clancy is more international intrigue, pretty much on the military side, whereas Crichton is sort of single topic, amazing idea, building a book around it, which is a lot of the stuff that I actually do in most of the stuff that I'm producing now. And then Stevenson and William Gibson were a little bit more, not fantasy, but a little bit further forward in the future, more cyberpunk as we're talking about, that kind of point of view. So the first series of books that I wrote, which was Atopia Chronicles, those would fit pretty much solidly into the cyberpunk sort of space, and that's where it kind of started out. And then when I wrote Cyberstorm, although it has the word cyber in it, it actually is a different type of point of view, which kind of it makes it more of a Michael Crichton, Tom Clancy, a little bit of international intrigue in there. So actually, readers that were coming from my Atopia series, which is pretty much more cyberpunk, coming right into Cyberstorm, which is a book I wrote after that, which is more Clancy and Crichton. So I was sort of splitting it between those two things, even though they're kind of very different, but it still would appeal. It still would appeal to both audiences, I think. That's why I think I had that reference in there. Also, this is some marketing material I probably wrote about 6 years ago. So I'm trying to go back and remember why I wrote some of those things, but yeah, it makes sense.
Oh, yeah, that's how it goes completely. And I do think that's really cool to hear about where you started and then how things have evolved. And it sounds like you'll be refreshing everything. But yes, can we talk a little bit about Cyberstorm and the adaptation for film, TV?
Sure. So the a friend of mine that's coming in my office in the
Oh,
background. Um, and then my phone's ringing, of course. Um, yeah, so Cyberstorm was optioned by 20th Century Fox a couple of years back, and it's actually been optioned as well by NBC Universal to adapt as a TV series. And so those are just still projects that are ongoing. I've had most of my books have been optioned for film and TV by different groups, so they actually haven't come out yet. But I'm hoping the next couple of years that we'll start to see something come out of all of these projects.
oh, that's so
I mean,
exciting. So is it already in the development? Like, how involved will you be in the development? Or is it like hands off? The author isn't invited?
it's pretty hands off. I mean, I have agents and people that I work with that help me work on these things. It's pretty hands off though. You don't really they send me a check for the option, and then I have a bunch of language that's written into there about uh, that I get to be an executive producer, which really doesn't mean anything. You get to have some consulting on it, but it's very hands off.
Totally understandable. Okay, well, you have written global books such as Darknet. And what I'm interested in with these kinds of stories is how the world connects together. And this is something we see in a lot of cyberpunk is how the world is very small because obviously we're connected through technology and everything. But how did this challenge you as an author? You've written in stuff that's cyberpunk versus not cyberpunk. And maybe this is throughout every book you've written, or maybe this was particularly challenging for certain books. But can you talk to us about that?
You know, I tend to I have a luxury, I think, that I tend to wander wherever my imagination takes me. And so in Utopia Chronicles in particular is about a world of unlimited virtual reality. And I actually wrote that 10 years ago now, although it took me about a couple of years to write those 3 books in that series. But that came out of research work that I did earlier in my career when I was in my mid-20s. I started a virtual reality company, and we did that tactile feedback and haptics. And so I spent good 10, 12 years working in virtual reality space. And then I went on to work in some other spaces. But because of that 10 or 12 years that I spent really intensely working in that space and doing some really bleeding edge stuff, I had a lot of thoughts about what my ultimate, if I was going to create the ultimate system for interacting in a virtual world, what would be that ultimate reality? And then what would it be like to live in that reality? And actually the main character in that book is like a 20-something-year-old person, which fits into the cyber. And so it's not focused on the technology. It's just saying if this technology existed, how would humans interact with each other and with machines, and what would the world look like? And so that book was a accumulation of that whole line of thinking. And so there I created a lot of time. I spent a lot of time in world building and building something and then having people live inside of that world. Whereas a book like Cyberstorm was built more on the premise of, since I spent a lot of time working in the cybersecurity world, that I go to these conferences, and I used to go and present in Washington on cybersecurity and this stuff. And every time we had these conferences, all the people would say, wow, the average public just has no idea what happened if we had a major cyber event. And one of the guys that I presented with, he used to like to live, he lead with a statement like, if we had a major cyber event within a month, we'd end up reverting to cannibalism, because that people don't understand the link between the cyber world, which is usually just the internet and computers, and it's all nice and clean, and then the actual nitty gritty of the physical world. And so Cyberstorm was showing that link, like step-by-step progression of what happens if we lose all of the cyber world and how it would impact the physical world. And it's told from the point of view of an average family living in New York City. And it gets pretty grim before it gets better. There is a happy ending to it, but it gets a little bit out of control before things get back into control.
You definitely explore the possibilities.
Yeah, so that was more of an illustration of a point. And then when I get into a book like Darknet, um, that book actually explores the idea of cryptocurrencies. Although, and this was before cryptocurrencies became popular. Like I wrote that book about 5 years ago now. But it wasn't. It was talking about the merger between cryptocurrencies, which are in the end are digital autonomous corporations. These are like autonomous entities that run on the internet with very little human oversight. Which, if you think about Bitcoin, it's more generally it's an autonomous corporation that runs on the internet. And then I merged that with artificial intelligence. I did quite a bit of work I started out working as a researcher in Artificial Intelligence Institute. And so I wanted to talk, in that book, I wanted to explore more what artificial intelligence, if it run amok, what it might look like. Because it always frustrated me whenever I read a book about artificial intelligence, they always make it into like a person, but like a superhuman person, whereas an artificial intelligence would not be like that, or would not necessarily be like that. So I was trying to illustrate realistically what it might look like if it got loose in the world, and then combine that with autonomous corporations, like what versions of Bitcoin in the future would look like. And so that was really the impetus for that book. And then I went on and wrote Nomad, which is about a giant object destroying the solar system, and that's totally different. And my last book, Polar Vortex, is actually about an airliner that crashes over the North Pole, which has like it has very little science fiction, but it was just a fun topic that I wanted to explore just for entertainment's sake. And now I'm in the middle of writing a future detective series, which is a bit more going back to the tech thriller stuff.
So cool.
Long-winded, yeah. But
did you get to travel for the Polar Vortex?
I live in Canada right now. It's my primary. So we have, in Montreal, it gets to, -40 in the middle of winter quite regularly. So I don't have to go far to experience extreme cold.
You're living it.
Living in the middle of it. But actually, I did actually ask what part of the book is centered in a place called Alert in Nunavut, which is it's the most northerly inhabited place on planet Earth. And it's a NATO military base. But I did talk to the base commander, who gave me enough information about it to give a very detailed description that I use in the book. And I actually asked them, they actually considered my request to fly me up there on a Hercules transport. Yeah, but in the end, they decided not to do it, but they thought about it for a while. And I said, come on, please let me know.
It was out there.
I'm not a security risk or anything. And I've actually been on, in the past, when I've been doing research, like I've been to American Air Force bases where I have to go through the whole security checkpoint and to go to the cyber installations in some of the U.S. military Air Force bases. I like to do a lot of primary research and talk to people when I'm doing books. So.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. So for anyone who might be interested in also doing more primary research, were these people you knew, or did you just reach out to them kind of cold and say, hey, I'm writing this book? How did you go about it?
Yeah, no, I just reach out, and in my background, I did a lot of work as an entrepreneur. And that background kind of lends itself towards just calling people up and getting things done and just saying, hey, so like, for instance, when I did my book, Darknet, south of Montreal here, we actually have where the Mohawks live. And so they have a technology center on there that they run all these online casinos from. And I thought this would be a great place to have a lot of scenes from the book. So I called up the Mohawk elders and said I wanted to base my book there, and they actually let me come in and talk to like the chief of the Mohawk elders and explain to me their environment, and I went to the powwows. They have these like summer festivals, and so a lot of and then some of the old guys and some of the characters that are in the book are from people that I talked to there, and so I tried to do like an accurate, fair reflection of their society, and then the events that happen inside of that are directly from stories when I talk to people. And also, like, another example is Darknet it's a book set in New York City. It's about artificial intelligence that runs amok in in a large bank in Manhattan. And so I got one of the vice presidents of one of the Goldman Sachs. Is it Goldman Sachs? Yeah, Goldman Sachs. One of the VPs in charge of security, Goldman Sachs. So he talked to me and then gave me a description of like all the stuff. And I actually went to meet him in Manhattan. So I try to base as much as I can out of. And in the book Polar Vortex, one of the base commanders from this military base actually spent a couple hours talking with me and describing some of the installations and how things worked and the way the language that they use and things. So people will talk to you. There was people like talking to authors, as long as you're nice and entertaining, I guess.
And yeah, they are interested in your project, and yeah, it's about breaking down those barriers. And sometimes we're such introverts as writers or other creators.
Yeah, no, it does. It helps too. I like to go out and talk to people, and the real information that you get from people helps to inject that sense of realism into stories. It's not just they're not just cardboard cutouts. They can make people and places come much more alive. And I do tend to go and visit the places. Like the book I'm writing now actually happens in Kiev in Ukraine. So I'm going to be, and I've got a fan of mine who lives there, and so I've been talking with him about the political situation and what's happening with Russia. And so I'm actually going to travel to Kiev and spend some time there when I'm finishing writing the book. And so yeah, I enjoy that.
That totally makes sense, and that's really interesting that you're going to write most of it first, and then get that experience once you kind of have a bunch written. Was that by design?
Not by design. It's just by my living schedule. I could get it. You're always trying to fit things together when you're a writer. So it's, you do your best to try and fit everything together.
Yeah.
But for that book, I'm going to be writing 2 books in it. So anyway, I'm going to go to Kiev towards the end of this writing schedule. Yeah.
Oh, so cool. Well, I was not expecting all that, but I think that's very inspiring to people who are writing or working on anything creative. So thank you for going on that tangent with me. So was anything, as far as like tips for like writing about different cultures, I think you've already touched on this, so it's fine if this is it, but was it difficult to like write other languages, or how much of the colloquialisms to inject, etc.?
Well, I have a little bit of a built-in advantage in that I was born in England, and so I've experienced, I've spent a lot of time, I have a lot of family in England and in Europe, and I've married a French Canadian girl here in Montreal, so I speak French fluently, and there's a different culture up here. But then all of my family lives in the U.S., in Nashville, North Carolina, and Atlanta. So I've been immersed in. So I understand that I've been immersed in straight American culture, and I actually worked in Silicon Valley for a while in California. So I think that experience of having a lot of different places that you've lived in and worked in lets you understand different cultures a little bit better, and also speaking multiple languages helps. I speak a bit of Spanish, speak French fluently, English pretty fluently.
Well, yeah, that would inform so much. It would help you kind of know what to relate to when you're shifting from one culture to another, or at least the way. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I live in Montreal primarily now. It's which is the second biggest French city in the world. So it's like often in my books I'll end up having a French character, and that's just easy for me because I can, I can throw that in because I can become a French character. I've got my wife is first language is French. So that's very easy, and then I can throw in the American character, and I can throw in a European character, and a British character. Obviously, I can throw in one of those, so that I do have a kind of a built-in advantage in having that different backgrounds. Yeah. So
living a full life that informs all the stuff you're writing about. Very cool.
Yeah, definitely.
So unless we've already covered what you'd like to talk about regarding this next question, what mistakes should creators avoid when writing cyberpunk or techno thrillers? is there something that just really grates on you, or that you just see as like an amateur mistake that people could easily avoid?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing to avoid when you're doing anything that like cyberpunk or tech thrillers is talking too much about the technology, like making things too much on the nose, where you've got these big narrative expositions on here's how this technology works. Like that is the number one thing that will turn people off and turn them away. Like you need to find a way to weave in the technical elements that as the character discovers it, or just let the characters use the technology and then rely on the intelligence of the reader to infer how things work. To a certain extent, you can throw in a little line of exposition here and there, but you need to let the reader live through the eyes of the character and experience whatever technological marvels and ultimately the technology and everything that's inside of books like this. It's not, the reader's never really interested in the technology, although it's fun to, like, you need to have the promise of the premise. If you've got unlimited virtual reality, it's not like the technology that's interesting, but how does it allow people to live differently? And ultimately the technology in these books is used as a mirror to hold up to, like, you use that technology to hold a mirror up to expose the things about the human psyche or human interactions, or some truth about the way human beings are. So ultimately, the focus is never on the technology; it's always on human beings, but from this new perspective that this technological marvel will enable. And so it's always a mistake to focus on, because there's like a fun, when you're a technical writer like that, you want to show how smart you are and how this technology is so amazing and nobody's ever thought of it before. And
Totally.
that's great, but that's a huge mistake. Like, you don't want to do that at all. You want to stay away from doing that and focus on the human side of it. Yeah.
And the story itself. So
yeah, I mean, story. I've got recommendations for stories. Ultimately, any person that reads a book, they're reading the book because there's a mystery. Like, you create a mystery in the beginning hook, and people only continue reading because they want to find out what the answer to the mystery is. As soon as the mystery's been answered, people will stop reading. And so you need to create mysteries and then delay answering them as long as possible. Like, you want to ultimately, if you can create a mystery in the first sentence and then answer it in the last sentence, that's a perfect construction for any story. And you need to have a satisfying but surprising conclusion and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, story structure is important.
it's something I know, but like hearing you put it that way, it's making me reflect about what I wrote last week. So I think that's really, really good to keep in mind. Like, did I present a question and then answer it towards the very end of that story? I need to make sure,
Yeah, create mysteries and delay answering them as long as possible, and that will keep people interested all the way through.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, well, finally, this is our last question, even though I'd love to keep chatting with you. It's so interesting, and I can tell that you've really pulled in so much of your experience into these series that you've been writing, and it's just really comes through. But about cyberpunk and techno thrillers in general, what have they taught you as a writer or a person, and what, if anything, do you hope they bring to the world or add to the world?
Well, ultimately, books are they're a form of entertainment. So I'm happy when I get I get a pretty steady stream of emails from people saying I loved your book. It's I spent a couple of nights reading, and it gives them a lot of pleasure and that enjoyment. And I think that's the I do enjoy that, knowing that you're doing something nice for people out in the world. Um, Yeah, I mean, I'm careful with the. Do you want to? Some of my books do tend to have messages in them, but that old adage: if you want to send a message, use a telegram or something. Like, you need to be careful about trying to send messages in your books. Although my last book, Polar Vortex, does veer towards it starts to touch on climate change, which is like a huge top hot button for a lot of people right now. But actually, I don't. Even when I touch on topics like that, I try to present both sides of a discussion. Like, so I have characters that are for and against something, and I kind of let the reader make up their own mind, while presenting, like, it could be this or it could be that. And I try not to step on one side or the other and say, this is the way you should be thinking, because that's kind of boring. But it is interesting to bring up some of those things. Like in my last book, Polar Vortex, I said it's happening in the far north, and part of it is the intrigue around, China's up there now with, icebreakers, and they're trying to make a base in Greenland, and that's true. And, you have ships are actually using the Northwest Passage for the first time, and like all these things are happening, and there's a geopolitical situation happening up there, and the ice is melting, whether it's caused by people. So I don't want to tell people why things are happening. I'm just saying, like, this is happening, and this is why the world is changing, and this is an interesting, and so that creates an interesting environment, And so I'm not trying to, I don't try and want to send messages and hope that it's going to change the world, but at least if it encourages people to talk about some of those topics, then that's the most I can get out of it.
Yeah. And a lot of times people have just never conjectured what you've brought up. What if we started using the Northwest Passage, whatever, and it can inform their own exploration of the topic. So.
Right. That for them to go off and to look into it themselves. And that's about the most I can hope for. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I have just really enjoyed speaking with you, obviously. And is there anywhere you'd like to point everyone to if they're interested in jumping right in, or any sites?
Yeah, you can go to my website. It's MatthewMather.com. So it's MATTHEWMATHER.com, or just look up Mather on Amazon, and you'll see all of my books on there and all the reviews and what people think, and you can decide for yourselves and hopefully pick up the book. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, Cindy.
I just really enjoyed this conversation with Matthew Mather. If you are interested in editing help, Storypunks now offers editing help. So as I wrap up this episode, please remember to go to storypunks.world/editing. If you are interested in a free sample, that is a limited time offer. Usually these samples cost a little bit. When an editor takes a piece of your writing and goes through it and shows you, what that editing would be like. And I will also supply you with a really nerdy report. It's kind of off the charts, but that's kind of how I roll. And it will just, give you feedback if nothing else. So I hope you'll take me up on that. I am scheduling in advance, so don't worry if your manuscript's not ready. But reach out to me by going to storypunks.world/editing. Or if you really want the fast track, just join the newsletter at storypunks.world/newsletter, because that's where the previous link sends you anyway. And when you sign up for the newsletter, then it gives you an automated email that will link you right to where you start inquiring about editing. So that wraps it up for episode 49, and I am truly excited for our next episodes coming up. Let me just mention briefly that I will be gone the week of July 4th, so there will not be an episode. That'll be kind of a mid-break for the show. We're a little past the midpoint, but we're going to use that as the midpoint break. And I will be posting a double episode right before, and I'm really excited about those. So those happen next week, and then we'll have 1 week off, but there will be plenty to listen to amid all of that. So as ever, best of luck with everything you're working on. I'm sending you good vibes, and I hope you have a wonderful week.